heard the statistic that 40% of the food in the US goes to waste. While some of that food waste happens on a more corporate level, places like farms or restaurants or grocery stores throwing away food, and those are systemic issues that do need to be addressed through legislation, some of the food waste does happen on the individual level, people like you and me throwing away our food. So why is food waste a problem? On the grand scale, it's a problem because we're wasting all those hours of labor, we're wasting all these resources, and it is bad for the environment to put all that carbon out into the air. But it's also bad on the individual level because if you spend $500 a month on groceries and you're throwing away even 20% of your food, that's $100 a month that you're just basically throwing away. Think of all the manga you could buy with that money. I could buy like half of Chihayafuru in Japanese. Super relatable example, I know. So why should you listen to me, some random person on YouTube? That's a very valid question. I have spent most of my adult life in relative poverty. That means I could not afford to throw away $100 a month in uneaten food. I was also raised by two parents whose parents were products of the Second World War and Great Depression, so I was brought up to be very frugal with my food. We did not throw away food. I have one story that encapsulates this perfectly. I was on vacation in Hawaii when I was about 8 years old with my dad and my stepmom and I think a cousin, and we went out to eat, and I think I had Kahlua pork. I remember it was pork. And I liked it, but after a few bites, I just couldn't eat very much more of it because it was just way too salty for me. And my dad didn't believe me. Like, he thought I was just being like a pretentious little kid, like, I don't want to eat this food because I'm a kid. So he packed it up. We always packed up our leftovers from restaurants. Like, this was normal practice anyway, but we were on vacation and he packed up the food, he packed it up and he brought it back to our hotel, and then the next day he made me eat it. Like, I remember sitting at the hotel table, like staring, fighting back my tears as I was staring at this food that was just way, way, way too salty for me. And like, I remember forcing it down my gullet with like water for like a half hour until I finally got it all down. That is how serious we were about not wasting food in my family. So it's just embedded in me. It is a way of life for me, but I realize that it is not a way of life for everybody, especially people in my country, the US. So I thought I would share some of the tips that I have gleaned both from the way I was raised and also just from the years of being an adult living in poverty. So I'm gonna do this video in two parts. Part one, I'm gonna look more at the issue holistically and give some more global tips and hacks, like general tips and things that you can do to reduce food waste. Part two, I'm going to look at some specific items that you guys, the community, told me that you wasted. And if you hear mewing in the background of this video, we're fostering kittens and they just got separated from their mom. And one of them, Bitsy, he's adorable, but he just sits at the door and mews sometimes. So if you hear kitten mews, I'm sorry, that's Bitsy. Where was I? Right, part two of the video will be more actual recipes on dealing with specific items that go to waste. I'm talking mixed salad greens, I'm talking cucumbers, I'm talking avocados, fresh fruit, milk. The tips and the solutions that I propose are not going to work for everybody, depending on what your underlying root cause of your food waste is and depending on what kind of person you are. My tips are not going to work for everybody, and that is why I actually welcome, put in the comments section if you have any tips, even if they're ones that I covered, but especially if they're not ones that I covered, add any tips that you have on how you cut down on your food waste in the comments, and maybe we can help each other out. So the first section of this video I'm going to call Identify the Problem. You can't solve your problem if you don't know what it is. So the first step in identifying the problem is just take stock of all of the food that you tend to waste, like actually physically write a list. If you carry your phone around with you, most of you probably do, have a little notes app open and just like make a note of every time you throw something away. And then while you're taking stock of what you throw away, focus on why you're throwing it away, because there are many different reasons that you might be throwing away food. You might throw the food away because you forgot about it. You forgot it existed and then it went bad. Maybe you bought too much food. Maybe you made some aspirational purchases, like you wanted to be that girl and have a green juice every morning, so you bought a bunch of celery, a bunch of bok choy, 2 bunches of kale, and some apples and some cucumbers, and then like 2 weeks later, after you've been eating mac and cheese every morning, instead of green juice, you have all this like rotten sludge of veggies at the bottom of your fridge. Sometimes the food might not be stored properly, and you might not really be aware that this is an issue. But if food just tends to go bad on you faster than you think it should, maybe you're storing it improperly. Maybe you just don't like leftovers, or somebody else in your household does not like leftovers. One of my viewers responded, well, my husband, I just can't get him to eat leftovers. And I kind of have a similar problem. My husband, some leftovers he'll gladly eat, other leftovers he will not gladly eat. And he is not as dedicated to zero food waste as I am. So if there's something that tastes less than optimal leftover, I'm almost always the one who winds up eating it because I care more about it. But maybe that's also you. Maybe you don't like leftovers. And so you put them in the fridge with the intention of eating them, but then they just get older and older and less appetizing, and then you just throw them away. Maybe you have leftover ingredients from recipes. Like, let's say you see a YouTube video for somebody making chicken parm and you're like, ooh, that looks great. I'm going to make that. So you go to the store, you buy the ingredients. And after you've made the chicken parm, you find that you have half a pack of raw chicken breasts and half a big block of mozzarella cheese and some eggs left over. And you have no plans for any of those things. If you don't have plans for them, and if you don't know how to cook, how to improvise your own meals, those ingredients could go to waste. And maybe you waste food because you find that you ruin recipes and you have to throw it away because it doesn't taste good. That has happened to me, believe it or not. I am not a perfect cook. So if you answered yes to the first 2 items on that list, did you forget about the food or did you buy too much? You could definitely benefit from meal planning. I know this is a huge subgenre on YouTube and blogs and everywhere of like, ooh, planning your meals and food prep your meals, etc. There are a lot of like creative, colorful ways and systems you can do this, but sometimes it can be as simple as just writing a list. That is literally what I do. I have a Microsoft Word document. I write down every day of the week, and then I write down B:L:D: for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then I write in what I'm going to eat for those meals, because I'm a very exciting person. I plan all my meals in advance. Ooh, the sun came out, and now my face is all bright. Anyway, but plan your meals. I know, revolutionary concept, right? If you plan your meals, you're less likely to throw food away. So what I like to do when I'm planning what I'm going to eat for the week before I go grocery shopping, I first look at what I already have. Primarily, I look first in the fridge because that's where things are more likely to go bad faster. I look in the fridge. Maybe I see, aha, I made that chicken parm and now I have 6 leftover raw chicken breasts, half a block of mozzarella cheese, and some eggs left over. What am I going to do with all that? And that's where I start. I think, okay, well, what recipes use those ingredients? And I think, okay, the chicken and eggs, I could make oyaku donburi, and the cheese, I could make a pizza. So then I think, okay, I'm going to make oyaku donburi and I'm going to make pizza. So what other ingredients do I need to buy to make those things? And then I write those items on the list. Okay, I already have the pantry staples to make the sauce for the oyaku donburi. I already have the rice for that. So I just need to buy some onion and maybe some scallions for garnish or something. And then for the pizza, I already have some frozen pizza sauce from the last time I made pizza. I already have flour and yeast to make the dough. All I really need is pepperoni. So I write those ingredients on my list and I get those ingredients. And then sometimes I'll have leftover pepperoni and then I repeat the process next week. Okay, pepperoni, I can either freeze that for later or I can put it in a sandwich. You can see the cycle keeps going and going and going. But that is a very good way of planning your food because you're a lot less likely to waste ingredients this way. Another thing that you can do in your meal planning is set yourself up for success by planning meals that are good leftover and that freeze well. So that way, if you're still making too much food and there's just too much food, you at least have the ability to eat it leftover and it'll taste good, so you'll actually eat it. Or you have the ability to freeze it. So I'm talking any recipe that takes a long time to cook tends to taste better leftover. I'm talking casseroles, I'm talking stews, anything you make in a slow cooker. So if you make chili or mac and cheese or lasagna or dishes like that, they tend to taste good leftover and they also tend to freeze well as well. So if you plan those dishes more, you're going to set yourself up for success. And then under meal planning, I have a note here, actually write shit down. And I know it sounds revolutionary, but yeah, actually write stuff down, keep lists. I have, like I said, I have the list that is my meal planning. I have a broader list. I guess this is kind of like bullet journaling because I have a broader list for the month. These are the dishes that I've been craving and I want to fit somewhere into this month. And then I also have a list of the things that I'm keeping in my freezer so I can keep track of what I have so things don't get too old in the freezer. Write stuff down and that way you're more likely to remember it. So when you're planning your meals, this is a big one. Whatever has the shortest shelf life, that gets eaten first. So if I'm planning on eating in the week, I'm eating salad for a couple meals and then I'm eating spaghetti with sauce for a few meals, and that's going to be my plan for the week. I'm not going to eat the spaghetti with sauce first because the salad has ingredients that go bad a lot faster. It has things like fresh lettuce and cucumber and tomatoes, so I plan on eating that first. And this is another reason why it's really good to plan all your meals in advance. That way it takes all the guesswork out of everything. You're not like staring at your fridge full of ingredients you just bought and feeling overwhelmed. You already have a plan. Here's another tip that I had to kind of learn when I moved in with my husband, and that is like, in your plan, leave room for not having a plan. So sometimes, despite your best efforts and your best planning, your plan's not going to be perfect. Like maybe I'll plan on eating lasagna and I'll think that it's 6 servings, but it's more like 8 servings. So now all of a sudden my plan is thrown off. I have an extra day I have to deal with. So what I have come to do now is when I'm planning my week, or usually it's more like a 10-day to 14-day span, I tend to shop less often than 1 week because it's a little more efficient that way. Maybe I'll plan for 10 out of the 13 days, and then I leave some of those days blank. And those are days that I can catch up, eat food that didn't get eaten. I can make recipes out of leftover bits and pieces of ingredients that I happen to have lying around, or I can eat meals that I have in my freezer, or we can go out to eat. I had to learn to do this when I moved in with my husband because while I am a very, very planned person and I'm a very scheduled person, like I wake up and sleep at the same time every day, I eat about the same amount of food every single day. My husband is chronically ill and he's an insomniac, so sometimes he's like asleep all day, sometimes he's awake for 48 hours, and sometimes he eats 1 meal in 48 hours, and sometimes he eats 8 meals in 48 hours. So it's really hard for me to plan around him. So I often leave days unplanned so that the chaos may have a place to breathe. And the last tip in planning is to plan meals that have similar ingredients in them. So back to my chicken parm example, maybe that week that I made chicken parm, I should have already noticed, okay, I'm gonna have some extra chicken breasts, I'm going to have some extra mozzarella cheese. You know what I'm gonna do with those ingredients? I'm gonna make a barbecued chicken pizza the same week that I make the chicken parm. So they're sort of complementary recipes that use the same ingredients. Sorted Food, they're one of my favorite YouTube channels. They have like a meal packs app. It's like an app that tells you what to buy, and then it tells you what to cook with the things that you buy so that you have zero food waste. But the principle there is still the same. Make sure that you use your ingredients across multiple dishes. Another example I have, I made gyros recently, and I had yogurt and fresh cucumber and tomato and lettuce left over afterwards. So what I did with all those ingredients is I made a Greek salad with some pasta with the extra tomatoes. I have a video of myself doing this, by the way, so you can watch that. And then leftover yogurt, I often just turn that into smoothies with frozen fruit. So I kind of plan in advance. I know, okay, I'm gonna have extra of this one ingredient, so I need to make a plan to use it. The second global tip here is to shop mindfully. So the first question you need to ask yourself is, do I even need to go shopping? You know that meme, we already have food in the house. Like, look around. Do you already have enough food in the house that you really don't need to go shopping yet? I understand that this is not necessarily feasible for everybody. Like, if you have a 9-to-5 job and you're only free like consistently on Saturday, so Saturday is grocery shopping day, I get that. But if you have that flexibility where like you don't have to go shopping the same day every single time, like maybe you don't even have to go shopping, like look to see if you do need to go shopping. And 2, write a list. I am shocked by how often when I go shopping, almost nobody has a list. Like how do you guys go shopping without a list? I would be so overwhelmed. It would take me so long. It would be so inefficient, and I'd get so much food that I didn't need, and I would not get food that I did need, and it would be really annoying and terrible. I don't understand how people do it. Tell me your secrets. But yeah, write a list and stick to that list. Don't veer from it. Don't like, ooh, shiny green lettuce, ooh, avocados. Like, no, stick to your list. You can keep it on your phone, of course, or you can be old school like I am and like physically write it out on a piece of scratch paper. So I alluded to this a little earlier, beware of sales. Just because something is on sale, it doesn't mean that you should buy it. If you can't use it up on time, or if you don't have a plan to use it, it might just go bad and you might just throw it away, and you're not actually saving money, you're wasting money. So my general rule for sales is I only really buy things on sale if it's a pantry or freezer staple, and especially if it's something that I use regularly anyway. Like if I see soda on sale, or if I see canned tomatoes on sale or canned milk on sale, I will buy it. Like even if I have lots of it already, I'll buy it because I know I'm going to use it in a timely manner. Also, along that vein, beware of Bulk. You will save money, like the price per ounce is cheaper if you buy something in bulk. Like if you buy a giant block of cheddar cheese, it is cheaper per ounce than buying a little block of cheddar cheese. But if you wind up throwing away half of that giant block of cheddar cheese because you didn't have a use for it, you're not saving any money at all, and in fact, you might be wasting some money. One good way to buy in bulk is to shop at places like Winco. A lot of other grocery stores are doing this as well. Any places that have the bulk bins. So you'll see these like tall vertical bins, and they contain dry goods like dried fruit or nuts or rice or flour or sugar or powdered milk or all kinds of things. Winco's section is amazing, by the way, and you can buy as little or as much of it as you want at a wholesale price. So you're still getting that price discount. The price per ounce is still cheaper, but you don't have to buy a big thing of it. So that is how I recommend you buy things in bulk if you want to save money. Not to like go to Costco and buy this giant can of tomatoes and you only need like 1 cup for your spaghetti sauce and then you throw the rest of it away. Don't throw it away, by the way, freeze it. My next tip in shopping mindfully is to buy canned or frozen or dried whenever you can. I know that like aspirationally speaking, you know, we like the aesthetic of, oh, I go to the store and I go to the organic produce section and I buy all these fresh veggies and fruits and I cook myself a healthy and delicious and vibrantly colorful meal and it's great. But that is setting you up for throwing away those things. If you're the kind of person that consistently throws away fresh produce, consider buying it frozen. It's often cheaper. And that way you can use exactly as much as you need for the recipe. Let's say you're making a recipe of beef with broccoli and the recipe calls for 1 cup of broccoli florets. It's really, really difficult to buy exactly 1 cup of broccoli florets. Sometimes if you buy them pre-cut in the bags, it's usually like 2 cups, 3 cups of broccoli florets per bag. If you buy it like a whole on the stalk, you don't know how much broccoli floret that's going to wind up being, and usually you're going to have leftovers. And if you don't have a plan for those leftovers, you might throw them away. But if you buy frozen broccoli florets, you can just scoop out a cup, put the rest back in the freezer for later, and use it in your recipe. No food wasted. The same goes for canned goods, and often overlooked in my country at least, dry goods. Dried fruit in particular is a great hack if you like snacking on fruit, but it keeps going bad on you. Just snack on dry fruit. It lasts so much longer and it's portable too. And with this strategy, it's a great idea to just have a common stock of pantry and freezer staples that you just kind of always have in the background that you can draw upon to make meals. I'm talking about things like soy sauce, oyster sauce, vinegars, oils, canned tomatoes, canned tuna, canned milk, canned artichoke hearts, and like frozen veggies, frozen meats. Things that you can make complete meals out of on their own, or things that you can combine with like that little block of cheese you have left over, or those chicken breasts you have left over, or that fresh broccoli you have left over to make yourself a meal. And if you have a mental list of what these pantry and freezer staples are for you, you will be empowered to buy them whenever they are on sale and save a lot of money that way. My next tip is make sure you are storing your food properly. Again, you don't necessarily know that this is your problem. But look up things, right? Look up how to best store carrots, how to best store potatoes, how to best store milk or whatever. You might find that you're doing something wrong or that you could be optimizing it a little more. The general rule with fresh produce at least is like you want a little bit of moisture to keep things fresh, but too much moisture can make things rot really quickly. So I find that with moister veggies, the kind of veggies that if you squish it in your hand, it'll kind of mush up. So I'm talking like cilantro and fresh herbs, lettuce, cucumbers and stuff like that. You want to keep them loosely covered in plastic so that some of the water can escape. And sometimes I'll even put a paper towel in the bag, especially with cilantro, to soak up the extra moisture so that they don't rot. They tend to last like a lot longer if you do that. Certain things that people say you should keep in the pantry, like carrots and potatoes, I have found, at least where I live, because it's humid in the Pacific Northwest. Like back when I lived in California, I could keep these things in the pantry and they wouldn't rot. But up here in the Pacific Northwest, I tried keeping carrots out and they rotted like after 3 weeks. Where in California, they wouldn't have done that. Up here, they did. So try to look up storage tips like for your area or for your climate as well. Anytime you have excess food or excess ingredients, freeze it immediately and keep a list. So I actually just keep a Microsoft Word document of all the stuff that's in my freezer and generally when I put it in there, but you can of course label things. You can also just have like a visual, like the right-hand side of your freezer is the newer stuff and the left-hand side of your freezer is the older stuff, so you know that you have to pay more attention to the left than the right. That might be another method that you can use to keep track of the stuff in your freezer. Another thing you might want to do if you're throwing away food because it has gone bad or it's gone past the expiration date is ignore the expiration date. So Climate Town actually put out a really great video about this, so I'll just link to it. But expiration dates are kind of arbitrary, and they don't mean just because something is past the sell by or use by or expiration date, that doesn't mean that it's bad to eat. A lot of times these foods are perfectly good to eat. So it's actually best, instead of using the expiration date, smell it, taste it. If it smells fine, if it tastes fine, you can probably still eat it. When in doubt, obviously, err on the side of safety and don't eat it, especially if you have kids, but don't always trust those expiration and sell-by dates. I mentioned earlier with the freezer, like having a system where certain parts of the freezer are older or newer things. Do the same thing with your fridge. And also note that most fridge, I have found with most fridges, the very back is much colder. So like if I put lettuce towards the back of the fridge, it sometimes freezes, which you don't want. So I tend to put things that I don't mind if they freeze a little bit towards the back of the fridge, and things that I do want very, very cold. So things like milk, things like wine, my condiments like oyster sauce and soy sauce, and like jams and other things that, like, I don't mind if they freeze a little bit, and if they are extra cold, they'll last an extra long time. Things that you keep in the door or towards the front of the fridge are not going to be kept as cold. So you don't want to keep things like milk or dairy products towards that front or towards the door because they will go bad faster. With that in mind, you can have like sections of your fridge. It's like, well, this is the stuff that I want to eat first, this is the stuff that I want to eat next, and this is the stuff that I want to eat later. And that'll help keep you organized. So my next tip is to learn to improvise meals. Don't always cook things from a recipe. Learn the techniques involved behind cooking things, and not like, don't be a slave to recipes. Learn to just take ingredients that you have in your fridge and freezer and pantry and combine them together and make your own things. I've been doing that a lot on this channel recently because I feel like that's something that we're kind of lacking as a culture in my country. And it's a really valuable skill to have to save money. Along with improvising meals, you can also repurpose leftover ingredients. Like if you don't want to just eat your leftover mashed potatoes, you can turn them into gnocchi, or you can turn them into a crust for a shepherd's pie or something. And you can freeze them for later until you are ready to make those things, by the way. Like most things you can freeze. Like it's amazing how many things you can freeze. Really come to love your freezer. Any leftover meat that you have, you can put them in salads, you can put it in quesadillas, you can put them in curries, you can put them in stews sometimes. Even lunch meat, like you can repurpose that and put that in quesadillas. You can even freeze it if you're going to cook it later. It's kind of gross to freeze some ingredients if you're not going to cook them later. Like if you're going to freeze tomatoes, it's kind of gross to like defrost frozen tomatoes and eat them raw in a salad. But like if you're going to cook it later, you can totally freeze it. And you can do that with things like lunch meat or any other kind of meat. And then the next time you want to make quick tacos or quesadillas or something like that, you can dump it in there. You can turn leftover rice into fried rice or rice pudding. You can turn stale bread into breadcrumbs or into bread pudding. Like there's all kinds of recipes out there that repurpose old ingredients. Like you can just Google like, how can I use up leftover mashed potatoes, or how can I use up leftover bread? And like you'll find lots of recipes for things that you can do. And once again, if you have a fully stocked freezer and pantry, it'll be a lot easier to improvise these recipes without needing to go out to the grocery store to get more ingredients. So the next section is how to salvage your failed cooking attempts. Like let's say you're making a soup and you just added too much salt and it's so unpleasant to eat. It's like that pork that I had to eat in Hawaii that I cried while I was like eating and guzzling water with it because it was way too salty. You can always like add extra water, or what I like to do on the rare occasion in which I do oversalt a dish like that, I'll often just like make another, I'll make that dish again without any salt at all. And then I'll just mix them together so that it has a good salt level. And then I'll freeze the excess. If you overcook meat, you can slice it really thinly and put it in a sauce, or you can like overcook it even further in a stew and it'll then be edible. Again, there are some other tips and hacks, and all you have to do is just look them up. There's a wealth of information out there for you. Don't immediately knee-jerk reaction, throw it away if you ruin something. It might be salvageable. Might be. And then my last tip for salvaging bad cooking is suck it up and eat it. As long as it's not like overcooked in a way that's unhealthy, like there's really too much salt in it, or it's like burnt or something, just suck it up and eat it. I don't care if it tastes not as good as restaurant food or whatever, like just eat it. That's part of learning to cook, is forcing yourself to eat less than optimal foods, so you really learn, okay, next time I'm going to add more salt, next time I'm going to add some acid to this, or ooh, as I'm eating this, how can I fix it? Maybe it needs a sprinkle of lemon juice, maybe it needs a sprinkle of cayenne pepper, maybe it needs some hot sauce to mask that weird flavor that I've got going on. Eat it, because you'll learn a lot more that way. So these next tips are next level tips, and these are like a lot of the kinds of tips I'll find in like reducing food waste, things like save your pasta water and make coffee out of it, save your carrot peelings and turn them into candy or something like that. And it's like, that's a little extreme. You're not actually going to be saving that much money, or like, and they're very time consuming too. So I think some of those kinds of tips are impractical, but here are some very basic, like next level tips, like how to kind of up your game a little bit. So one of these is learn to can and pickle. If you have a lot of excess, especially if you're lucky enough to live in a house and have a garden, you might have an excess of cucumbers or squash or tomatoes or whatever. Learn to can and pickle them, because then you can preserve them for later. It's what our ancestors have done for many, many years, and it served them well. It can serve us well. And learn to make jam. I do that. Another one is to give away your leftovers or your extra ingredients. There have been times in my life where I have been not quite terribly, terribly poor, but a little bit food insecure. I just don't have very much money, not very much wiggle room, and I'm eating rice every day because it's all I can afford. And I deeply appreciated, there were some neighbors, some people in my neighborhood who had gardens, and they would leave boxes out in front of their houses with like free zucchini and cucumber and tomatoes and stuff from their gardens with a sign that says free. And I would take those ingredients and I'd take them home and I'd saute them in olive oil and serve them with the pasta that I had that I bought for $1. And like, I'd have really good, nutritious food. If you have that ability, give away some ingredients, give away food, give away leftovers to people. If there's a homeless person who lives in your community and you see that person around, like maybe get into the habit of giving them some leftovers every single time you have them. Like, some people can really appreciate this. Also, if you're lucky enough to live in a house, I know this tip, I get really angry when people tell me, oh, you should compost. It's like, yeah, I'll compost on my 3-foot by 3-foot concrete slab that's outside my apartment. It's like, some people don't have the infrastructure to compost. And, you know, I could buy fancy equipment that would enable me to do that, but that costs a lot of money that I don't have. But if you are lucky enough to live in a house, by all means, compost. It's a way to save money. It's a way to recycle your products, repurpose them. You're keeping that carbon and that those nutrients and that energy into making more food rather than rotting in landfills. So it's a great practice to get into if you have the ability. And then try to get into the practice of using everything. I have probably saved, I was doing the calculations before I sat down and pressed record, I have probably saved about $50 a year over the past several years by making my own chicken broth out of scraps. From chicken. I'm talking chicken carcasses, chicken bones, and scraps like the tops and bottoms of onions and carrot peelings and tops. By saving all those things in the freezer and making my own chicken broth, I have saved so much money over the years. Rendered fat when I cook meat. I have all these like mugs of rendered fat from that I use in my cooking, and I save a lot of money that way too. You can also do things like candy citrus peels and fry off potato skins. That's more next level stuff. So anyway, those are all my broad global tips. In part 2, I am going to get more into specific techniques and recipes that you can do to get rid of specific ingredients that a lot of people have trouble using up before they go bad. I'm talking salad mix, I'm talking cucumbers, I'm talking avocados, milk, bread, fresh fruit. So come back for part 2 if you're interested in some more specific recipes and tips. I also have some links in the video description to videos that you might find helpful that are in this vein. Bitsy the kitten is just yowling. I better tend to him before my husband wakes up. Bye!
Why are you so loud? Why? Why? You're cute, but you're loud. Say hi. Oh, now you're quiet.